when I am connected, I know that I am of Source. I am not separate from Source. When I feel disconnected, I don't even feel there is a Source.
Yeah, deep thoughts here on this Solstice day. You can ask questions, but please don't ask me what I saw for you while you were practicing to internalize your own experience with your higher self. Take these words that were spoken here, that were reflected on with all of you, as the deeper version of your inner experience, and try to find sort of your maybe pillars in there, okay? Like, what are the resistances that you experienced? What are the releases that you experienced? What are the higher perceptions that you experienced? I would love if you would share this with us. We have a forum thread for this session. Yeah, I would love for you to tell us, yeah, as we are all higher selves here on the journey, what your inner experience of this connection with your higher self. This is my rendering of the connection experience, and how this experience of connection with higher self translated for the group here, for this field that was created through all these individuals from all over the world, aligning themselves to their higher self. There was a lot of stuff in the beginning that had to do with us wanting to know the future, with us wanting to get a clear picture of what our fate or our purpose is. So this is why I responded with the initial discussion about meaning. Yeah, and that was felt through a little bit of pressure in the temples and in eyes, ears, sort of the head area, but not like a headache or anything. It was specifically about us tapping into our higher perception. And there were some cool visuals there. Julianne, Cindy, Cheryl, you guys could connect with something that you described as a tree of life. There was also a possibility that you saw something like, whatever the, sort of the archetype represents itself to you as like something like a winged being or an angel being. This is not uncommon, guys, that when you are truly seeking this connection with your higher self, that you see these images or imagery of angel beings. Okay, I've mentioned this before. The trick here is to not get mesmerized by this and start interpreting it from your ego's perspective. Yeah, so it is in our collective unconscious as an image. Yeah, when we think of a higher self or think of the spirit being in us, yeah, that we associate this with, an angel or winged being. And I'm not saying here that it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that if you perceive such images, work with them, but refrain from interpreting it as like, Archangel Michael, Gabriel, or whatever is coming to the rescue. That's ego, okay? Chances are that what you are connecting with at that moment and what these images are conveying to you is related to your own spirit being. Yeah. And when you see groups of angels, it's often the people on your path. It's often the higher selves on your path. then we had a phase, I think that was like 15 minutes in, where there was a very strong grounding, and it was felt through a root chakra. This was the quickening that I have been talking about so much here over the past weeks, that when we challenge ourselves, when we step into, say, unknown territory, when we overcome our fears, when we step into a challenge, it leads to a quickening of our life force, because in that moment we are literally, you can literally visualize it that way, tapping into source, the source of life force. And it's very raw, and it can be a little distressing. Some of you may have felt that as a release of pain, as a release of emotions. Some of you may have felt it as a strong, like I want to say, empowerment, perhaps. Yeah, where you suddenly felt, or like something really motivating. Yeah, and some of you may have felt this as something uncomfortable. Yeah, because whenever our root gets activated, whenever the energy that flows between this physical experience and source itself, it can be a little overwhelming. It can feel that it's too big for us, for our little physical self. And then I would say that the second half, that the last 30 minutes were all about us aligning to this love for the divine, our heart chakra. This is where we can feel this divine love, this unconditional feeling of connection, which is ultimately what we all long for. This unscathed and untainted, pure connection itself. So when we connect with our higher self, we can learn a lot about love, and unconditionality, and trust and truth with ourselves. And is therefore also challenging, because in that way that we are connecting with the higher self and in stepping into our spiritual autonomy, the accountability for what we're bringing into expression here, we also need to ask ourselves the question, if everything in my life is part of my own higher self's life plan, what is being conveyed here? When you can see your own life through your higher self's eyes, let's say, let's call this context, you see the bigger picture. You begin to see things that you couldn't see before, because you were too busy, coping, dealing, and resisting with pain. The pain of not feeling separated, of not feeling like a co-creator, of feeling like a victim, of feeling, a victim of randomness or God's will or somebody else's will, you name it, content. So when you step into this connection with your higher self, you can find both. You can find peace, and it opens up your higher perception to, the meaning of your karmic experiences, your karmic lessons here. Like the instruction manual, it literally lays it all out, and you can learn how to overcome it easily. Or it can also scare you, because it means that you have to Take responsibility for your experiences. And the ego does not want that. So that is the schism that we all feel, guys. So there is no connecting with your higher self and no finding peace without learning to overcome your ego. And this connection process with your higher self can help you with that, because it can show you what your ego cannot see. And in a way, it allows you then to kind of reverse engineer why your life had to be exactly the way it was or is for you to arrive at this consciousness level.
When I am connected, I know that I am of source. I am not separate from source. When I feel disconnected, I don't even feel there is a source. And there's a very big fluctuation space in between. I'm conscious of that fluctuation space now. And when I'm not in my truth, I feel like that there is a this and there's a that. Like there's a, none of that feels true, if that makes sense. Being in connection with who I truly am wipes out all of that fuzziness that you spoke about at the beginning. There isn't any more questions, and there is only one answer, and that is that it is all is. And I can hear my description, and it sounds very weird, but it's true. Once there's a touchdown into that place of who I am and my connection with my true self, then none of this requires an explanation. It just is. When I'm not there, I seek for descriptors. I'm not sure if that's making any sense. I can hear this explanation, and it doesn't even make sense to me.
Oh, Cheryl, I love it. I love it that you're trying to find words for something that we are, first of all, not used to talk about and to define it. And you brought some interesting points into this discussion. First of all, you referred to source, okay? And this, you said something about when you are, and this is paraphrasing here, when you're in a low place, you cannot feel source. And when you are connected with it, you don't need to question it, okay? That's a slightly different answer to the question, because the question was whom we believe is responsible for all of this that happens to us in our life, right? But you intuitively brought up source. And then let me ask you one question, and that will clarify it for yourself. What is source? The source of all that is happening, and the source of your own existence. That's literally what we're exploring here when we are connecting with our higher self. We're investigating the source of all that is unfolding in our life's journey. And the two options that we are being offered, say, through the collective is that, well, it's either all random, we live in a material world, it's all, just, like Big Bang Theory or something, all just happens out of nowhere. There's no purpose to anything, and dog eats dog, and that's it. So whether a person is happy or unhappy or rich or poor is all just random. Or the other alternative is that it's all part of God's plan, and only God knows that plan. We are completely in the dark. We are some kind of, I don't know, I don't want to sound cynical, and I don't mean it that way, but we're just sort of executors of something that is predestined. Yeah, these are the two versions of source and of what our life's meaning could be, that we are offered through the collective. And you brought up source, so let's investigate this. What do you actually mean when you say source?
I think that's where it gets all tricky, which I think is why people break it down into those two options, because it it just is. It doesn't have a definition, in terms of a 3D. When you break it down into those two, it's this or it's that. It's God is the orchestrator of everything, or there is nothing to orchestrate. That's challenging.
What if it's both?
Well,
What if there's a third option?
It's everything all at the same time, because we are the creators of our life, of our destiny, of our karma, of our past, present, future, and we do it because we are source. We are doing it in conjunction with. So we are, and source is, and the whole thing comes together so that we're co-creators.
Yeah. That's the third. That's the third option, Cheryl. That's not part of the other two. The third option is that we are part of it, and that through us something is expressed, namely source itself, or the source of all existence. And that was in that experience, something individual has to happen. Julianne is chiming in here. Thank you, Julianne. This is exactly what it's all about. And you're more than invited to turn on your microphone. We believe that if we believe that we are limited, then we actually are. That is one of those big sort of new agey phrases, right? That we are all sort of masters of our destiny, that we are co-creators. But what we fail to do is to actually investigate this, what this truly means. What does it mean to say I am co-creator? Which would be the third option. That there is some kind of plan that I have for my life that allows me to form my own destiny here for a lifetime, or perhaps even seen in the bigger context. Yeah, because when this life ends, I go somewhere, right? This spirit being, this soul self, this higher self that I can feel within myself, it's got to go somewhere. Where does it go? Follow me down the rabbit hole here for a minute, because these are things that we are not taught to explore, especially not if we are only given those first two options. Now it's all random, or it's all God's plan. You don't understand this. You have no say in this. Just go with the flow. But what is our higher self, in essence? Any ideas? How does it feel like for you? You came here today to connect with your higher self out of an impulse, out of perhaps the idea that there is something like a higher self. But before we go into the quality of that connection and perhaps the content that we could find there, messages or impulses or guidance, we need to define this. It's very, very important. We can't just go in and say, oh, I want to connect with my higher self, and not even know how we relate to it. What comes up for you guys? How are you, the one that is listening to me right now, to us here, relating to your higher self? How do you see that? Is it like the better version of you?
Hi, Jona. This is Abigail.
Hi, Abby.
Hi. I don't know that it's the better version of me, but how I feel towards my higher self is that that I want to have a responsibility towards my higher self. I want to do my best to align to my higher self and like listen to her and always listen like more to her as I go along, so that I can like really be like a sovereign soul self, like a little bit more each day. That's how I feel about my higher self. I just feel this kind of like desire and want to not let her down.
So that assumes, though, that your higher self is in the know, right? I mean, that it knows something that you don't know, right? I mean, it sounds a bit like a better version of you, or a version that has, let's say, maybe the bigger picture, the bigger perspective.
Well, I suppose the other side is, which is something I've learned with you, is that it's actually my choice, that I can sit here as myself now and decide how I want my life to be. But like for me, and how I want to live it, who I want to be, how I manifest that. But for me, that also comes down to that feeling of like that inner self-responsibility, and
Yes.
that feeling that I like, having let myself down in the past because I didn't know what I was about or didn't know what I was doing, but now I feel very deep need and desire to be as honest and kind of courageous about that as I can be, because I want to, literally just because I want to, because I know that's the best thing for me. And moreover, like, it's you know, if you think you want to kind of like help other people or kind of be with other people, then actually ultimately that's the only way we would ever do it is actually by this sense of self, like this sense of responsibility towards ourself or myself.
Yes, a responsibility to it, ourselves or yourself. That's the key. And this was really, if I had to summarize it, this was what this entire session was about. That's why we're going into this rabbit hole right now, because apparently we are all talking about different versions of self here, right? And that's something that we need to become clear about. When we read the invocation, for example, it says something here in the first sentence. I freely choose to believe that you are present in me and everything around me. So apparently that is not necessarily a given, yeah, because there's a choice aspect in this. I choose to believe that. Now that's my framework. I choose to believe that there is some kind of higher being in me, yeah, that may not be fully aware to me. But when it's not fully aware to me, who is then the me? Okay, so there is another self, the one that I am experiencing here in my everyday life. In consciousness training, we call this the ego self. It's the one that identifies with thoughts and emotions and this physical body, yeah, that has to deal with with everyday's ins and outs, yeah, that accumulates experiences, that develops coping skills and so forth. So it's the worker bee, if you will. Yeah, the ego self, the one that we are now here hearing. That's the ego self. It's experiencing itself as this physical being in this 3D life. But as it's doing this ego self, as it is doing life, okay, there's something that we can, that this ego self in us is feeling as well. And that is something like a higher self and something like a lower self. If you think about your lower self, what is it that you experience as your lower self, guys? If the higher self, yes, Annette, if the higher self is like a truer version of us, right? What's the lower self then?
The one that's kind of based on our needs, like our physical needs.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes also just simply our wishes, right? Like, you know, the lazy butt in us, right? I mean, that's to a degree our lower self, yeah? We want to avoid pain and we want to seek pleasure without any consideration of what it does to others or what the consequences might be. It's like a little child to a degree, right? Like a 3-year-old. Now, the ego self is a little smarter than our lower self because the ego self knows, if you run through the world with just laziness or just, owning or, maximizing pleasure, yeah, that's not a really successful strategy, right? You got to understand that your ego self is not dumb, okay? And then it tries to form, sort of a better version of itself, okay? So we all have a lower self, and it's very much linked to our needs, yeah, and that's very much linked to our, if you will, innocent, unaware, unrefined, physical, yeah, like childlike version of ourselves. The ego self has to deal with that, and it has to form a workable identity, yeah, with which we can walk through this life and say to ourselves, well, yeah, I constantly have issues with, this or this or that, all right, but I've worked out ways, yeah. Let's say I have weight issues, or I have issues with substances, or I have issues with relationships, or I have issues with money, or I have issues with, like seeing the world as something that I can connect to. I feel lonely, yeah. So that's what the ego self forms. It forms a view of life, and with it also a certain attitude to life, So it's not the same as our lower self. Our lower self is pretty simple. Yeah, it just has needs and wants those needs to be fulfilled, no matter what the cost. Yeah, and gets into trouble. And the ego self is there to deal with it. Yeah, tries to tweak it a little bit. But the ego self does not really have an awareness of what you so beautifully defined here as, Cindy, as the higher self that guides us to a higher expression. The ego self believes that its version, its contextualization of life and self is the one. It believes that it knows better than random and better than God. Yeah. So we form this sort of, we form our own identity. This is where most of us get stuck in our life. We still fundamentally follow avoiding pain and seeking pleasure as overall strategies. So nobody wants to experience pain. Nobody wants to experience lack or anything like that. So we keep fighting all our lives against experiencing pain. But there's something that we realize when we get a little older, and that is that there are repeats. So how does karma play into this, guys? How does karma play into, or your understanding of karma, into these three versions of self: lower self, ego self, higher self? Who determines your karma? Why are they repeats in your life? Why does it seem as if there is like an outer power that keeps pulling you into similar experiences? Like a teacher of some sorts.
Is it, Jona, because of our error perceptions?
Well, you mean the struggle? The struggle
like
with life? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and not seeing things at certain, kind of repeating things like that, repeat loop.
Yeah, I mean, when we're unaware, we don't see the repeats, right? So I'm referring to you guys as conscious seekers, all right? So I'm assuming that most of you, if not all of you, have already discovered this, yeah? That there is some kind of teaching here. We just don't quite know what it is, or we don't want it. Yeah, so that would be, but both would be the ego self, okay? So it's like, oh, it's mysterious. Yeah, it's a form of externalization. Or it's like, no, I don't want it. I know better. I know better than God, or I know better than source, or I know better than whatever higher power I believe in. That's the cause for most of our pain. But the point here is not why we're experiencing pain. The question is, what or who is that teacher? Yes, Cindy, I agree with you. And that's really something that most of us here, or an insight that most of us have already come to. There is a learning what we need to overcome. Yes, and exactly, Julian. Overcoming what the ego believes, overcoming these identities, yeah, these false self identities. So when we are connecting with our higher self, yes, Abby, when we're connecting with the higher self, we're connecting with the part in us that knows why we're experiencing certain things. You're asking, is the higher self teaching us? Well, this is exactly the subject of investigation here when we connect with our higher self. Why do we even want to connect with our higher self? Yes, Annette is chiming in. You say issues that we chose to overcome in this life. Well, I don't know about you, Annette, but if I ask my lower self, did you choose to experience all this pain and all this abandonment and all this like betrayal and did you choose? Heck no. If I ask my ego self and say, did you choose to experience all this? He goes, heck no. This is all other people's faults. So who chooses what we need to experience or what we need to overcome? If we believe in karma, which would be the third option, the karma is basically the individuated version, yeah, of destiny, if you will. With the purpose, and yes, you guys got it, with the purpose of evolving, of growing, with the purpose of perhaps undoing something, yeah, redeeming ourselves for something that we didn't do that well last time around in whatever dimension. Now, let's say we were a crappy parent and we abandoned our children. And that creates an imbalance in you because this is not something that you've experienced as a happy, fulfilling thing. We can even see those cycles within one lifetime. But let's say, yeah, that you mess up something, that you don't respond to whatever happens in your life based on your higher expression. What does that create in you? There's some kind of need to balance that out. Yes, it creates schisms in us. It creates a split, exactly. And then that split, yeah, that schism that we experience as painful, wants to be balanced, wants to be harmonized again. So sometimes you can go through this in one lifetime. You do something, you know, I don't know, when you're 20, and then you realize, oh shit, you know, that was not actually the best version of me. And then you make an effort, yeah, say for the rest of your life, to do better. You become aware that there is a better version of you possible. And in that moment when you decide to do better, is the moment where you become accountable. It's the moment where you step into your karma and say, I consciously choose to refine me. I consciously choose to bring my higher self into expression. If I would ask my lower self or my higher self, my ego self, I don't really get a good answer there. My lower self doesn't see the need to change anything, and my ego self just creates a projection of a better version of me, what I believe a better version is. But my higher self is the one that knows what my higher expression is. And so it helps me along the way, unconsciously, until we consciously recognize its presence in us, until we consciously contemplate these things that we are contemplating here right now. It's a bit difficult, isn't it? Because we never really go there. But that's the purpose of higher self, because in this time right now here at the peak of the solstice, it's the moment where, or not moment, it's a time frame, it's a sort of a week in which we can feel this, the separation between our lower self, our ego self, and our higher self is almost not there. We can feel it all at the same time. Now, if we practice this, if we engage in this connection or connecting process with our higher self, then we can always feel it. So the purpose of connecting with our higher self is to consciously step into our self-responsibility, becoming accountable for what is unfolding in our life as karma, recognizing it as the greater life plan for ourselves in order to evolve, in order to learn what it takes to be our higher version, if you will. And the way this higher version of ourselves, or the nature of that higher version of ourselves, you can find it here in the invocation. It's the divine expressing through me as you. And remembering that the source of all is in me too, and that I am an expression of this source, the divine, the source of all existence as well. It is expressing through me, and not just me, you as well. But in this case here, where it says, I forgive myself unconditionally for separating from you, I'm talking to my higher self, and thus dedicate this most blessed conscious moment, the moment where we consciously choose to connect with our higher self, to the love for the divine, expressing through me, that would be the ego self or the lower self, as you, the higher self. Which then links us into the capital I am. The capital I am refers to the higher self, the God self, if you will. Not in this grandiose way, but in, with the understanding that the higher self is pure, linked to source itself. And that we all, as individuals, but also as united I ams, expressing the divine here in 3D. So this was a bit deep here, but it is basically the next level to connecting with your true self. And that's why we couldn't just leave it there as, this understanding of, I want to connect with the truer me or anything like that. Because this is something that we have been striving for all along. But if we really want to explore what our own life's plan is, and what co-creation really means. What does this mean that I can choose my life, that I can choose what expresses in my life? It means that I have to be willing to step into this higher version of myself, into this higher self, and be accountable and understand that the pain that I am experiencing, that you guys so correctly identified as the lessons, the things that need to be overcome. There's a lot of these examples that came up here in the session. The lack of trust in self, the lack of truth with ourselves, self-deception, this constant sort of feeling of fear, being cast out or not belonging, the separation pain. Focusing too much on the material self, and on the ego self. Getting stuck in fear, and losing courage, lack of courage to actually step into our life. Lack altogether the fear of loss, of the seeing scarcity everywhere and trying to hold on to things. Not believing in love, for example, in the power of that. All the projections of ourselves, the ego projections, this sort of tweaked, constructed version of ourselves that the ego produces over time. The disdain and the anger that we have toward our own experience, the resistance that we have, and also obviously, how that gets projected onto others. And of course, the struggle with our needs. You have pinpointed it there. The inner child, the undeveloped, the unconscious part of us, that feels entitled maybe, or just, just wants to get through all this without any challenges, wants to stay in the comfort zone and just tries to get by, not realizing that the alignment that we have in those moments, or in with such a life plan, is basically, just trying to survive our life with no meaning. And this is the problem that we're experiencing in this world today. People cannot make meaning of their experience. They have lost the connection with the part of them that can actually inform them about meaning, about purpose. That's why we talk so much about soul purpose, soul tasks. And while this expresses with individual emphasis in our lives, so for some of us it's more this, for others it's more that, some of us are, just can't muster the courage to do what we truly want to do. Others have this big fear of being insignificant and just need, to have some kind of feeling of power, maybe through trying to control others. Some of us choose to live in a fantasy of ourselves, like we're not even, projecting it as something. We're just completely off, say, in a constructed better world. And some of us get stuck in the resistance to life itself and the pain that it brings, refusing the 3D experience altogether. So there are three main things, guys, that were shown in the session, and they are also part of the answer to life. Is number one, that the connection with our higher self provides us with an instruction manual, if you will, to our spiritual autonomy, to understanding that there is a life's plan for us, and also basically the karma that we are playing out until we step into this life lesson, into this life plan as conscious co-creators. Yeah, so conscious co-creation and spiritual autonomy, just different words for the same thing. Taking on your karma, yeah, consciously working with your karma. Again, another version of the same thing. Yeah, being accountable. Understanding that you have the power to co-create. Those who do not arrive at this consciousness level during a lifetime experience their life as a karmic repeat, being completely unaware of this, and therefore don't step into that co-creation power. In other words, for them, everything is either random or God's will. So spiritual autonomy allows us to recognize this, and this has to do with our consciousness level. So at some point in our journey, when we have had enough of investigating our lower self and our ego self, realize, wait, this isn't random. And this isn't determined from the outside either. It has something to do with my alignment, with my attitude, with my willingness to actually step into my life. Yeah, and that's then when you begin to feel something like the presence of your higher self. The second teaching or experience here in this session was the higher understanding of ego. Yeah, that ego is not the adversary. Ego is not the bad self. Ego is the fail-safe. It's the worker bee. It's the one that has to go through the experience with this pain and this resistance and trying to figure out. Ultimately, ego is part of our life's plan and is what allows us to arrive at this higher self-understanding. Yeah, so lower self, ego self, higher self, they're fundamentally stages of consciousness development. Yeah, on the way to evolve. And once you arrive in your higher self understanding, you also understand why you cannot disgrace or reject your ego self or your lower self, because they are part of that unfolding. Yeah. So from your higher self's perspective, all the mess ups and all the failures and all the pain and all the injustice and all that is all part of the package. You said it earlier too. And to be able to make peace with that, yeah, that's then, well, that's what becomes the goal. That is when we can say everything is perfect the way it is. And you realize that without your pain, without your mess-ups and your failures, you would have never felt the impulse to better yourself, to harmonize, to make up, to, just literally become a more conscious self without your pain, without your ego, and without your lower self, without experiencing all this separation. You would have not wanted to evolve. You would have just wanted to stay in Garden Eden, right? And then the third aspect that came forward in this session is a deeper understanding of the origin of pain, which goes hand in hand with, spiritual autonomy and understanding your own ego. And Cheryl, you actually nailed it right in the first sentence. It is whenever you cannot feel the presence of your higher self. That's when you experience pain. And that's then where the ego self jumps in and tries to come to the rescue. That's why we experience this as a schism, okay? It takes this kind of deeper contemplation, this kind of conscious connecting with your higher self, to come to the understanding that you are indeed a co-creator. You are always a co-creator, even when you're in your lower self or ego self, just not a very conscious co-creator. Yeah, and this is then where all the collective stuff links in, yeah, because there's this sort of mainstream, yeah, sort of the outer conditions, and the outer conditions on this planet here for humanity is still aligned to lower self and ego self primarily. Yeah, maybe we have a ratio of like 80%, ego self awareness and 20% conscious self awareness. Yeah, which is much, much higher than it was, let's say, 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 3,000 years ago. Higher as in connected to the higher self. But we still have ways to go. And it is up to us individuals to awaken to that, to awaken to our higher self, and to consciously choose to step into this co-creative power. And the individual or the subjective experience of that is something that nobody can tell you what it feels like. Nobody can give you the rules of that, because that is something, as a conscious co-creator, as a spiritual autonomous being, or sovereign soul self, Abby, as you called it earlier, that you need to discover. Any comments here or questions before we continue with our life and do this on our own? Cindy, Cheryl, and Julianne, thank you so much for being here, for everybody, for holding this field. Yeah, thank you for sharing here, and thank you for all of you who shared here in text or in voice. There will be a recording of this session. I need to take full responsibility for this. Forgot to push the record button for the first couple of minutes. So I'm going to have to edit it somehow that it makes sense. And I want to thank all of you for listening, if you're listening to the recording right now. Have a wonderful inner experience of your higher self. And maybe take a little extra time these days to practice this connection. Love you guys. See some of you very soon.